folks. I'm Eric Schumacher-Rasmussen with Streaming Media. Good to be back on another panel here. We have got a great lineup of speakers here to talk about one of the hottest topics in streaming right now, and that's remote production, or REMI, which was already trending significantly upwards until the events of 2020 made its trajectory even more of a hockey stick. And, you know, with everyone working from home, with offices, studios, concert halls, arenas closed, so-called quote-unquote at-home production literally became at-home production. And so we're going to talk about some of the trends that we've seen over the last 8 months or so, how those trends are likely to impact the long-term future of remote production, and what our panelists are seeing as the biggest opportunities and challenges in the field. And it looks like we just lost one of our speakers, but I have all the confidence in the world that he'll be back. And I was going to ask him to introduce himself first, but instead, there's Daniel. So Dan, you're back. Let's start with Neil, though, in case there's any lingering audio issues with Dan joining back in. So Neil, please introduce yourself and your company and what you do.
Hi, I'm Neil Andersson. I'm a project consultant with CodeMill. We're a Swedish software developer. We have a lot of expertise in building software-driven workflows in the cloud, primarily aimed at content preparation and QC prior to delivery to broadcast and OTT and VOD. So we've a lot of experience with cloud, but we're seeing even more of it now.
Great, Daniel.
So hopefully you're not going to lose me again. I didn't see any problem on my side, but I'm Dan Maloney. I've been working with Matrox 20 years as a technical varied roles, but the last 10 years or so, product management, ensuring our encoding and decoding platforms for web streaming and broadcast applications are up to snuff.
Terrific. And James.
Hello, Jim Fiore, Corporate Events Online. Owned and founded Corporate Events Online a few years back. Probably it's been a while, and what we do is we produce a meeting and event for the corporate industry and help everybody get online with, you name it, different types of applications, our stuff and others, and produce events, and it's just a mix of this. Well,
sure. So let's talk big picture. What are the biggest challenges right now for live and remote workflows as you see them, Dan?
Well, we of course now pre-COVID, we started to identify the need for remote production. We certainly weren't the first, but being able to do something affordably using networks that were readily available, namely public networks, was something that we felt would be great significance, great improvement to some of the higher end applications that are out there with dedicated dark fiber. So we wanted to, and it was very challenging to use the public internet to do some of these live remote productions, being able to transfer signals reliably using low latency technology, encoding and transfer technology. So what we wanted to focus on is how do we use lossy networks? How can we find ways to improve workflows that are inherently very difficult to manage in live? I think there's going to be some of the other panelists that will have made great strides also in remote production in VOD applications. And Raphael and I we're both going to be focusing on how, Raphael on the network side and myself on the encoder and decoder side, we really tried to solve some of the problems regarding to low latency transfers using a lossy network. Second point, when you're talking about remote production, it's the idea of synchronization of multiple video flows is something that's very important in a live production environment. How do you do that using public internet? So those are some of the challenges that we've seen and some of the focus of our technology.
Neil or James, what are the biggest challenges you've seen, particularly in the last 8 months after COVID, but in general for live and remote workflows? James, thoughts on that?
Yeah, we see a lot of challenges on some of do-it-yourself setups when people are trying to communicate online to the large workforce. There are many cases where people get a little confused with some of the everyday products that we use to communicate in some of our meetings, that it'll work. One situation may work for it all, and they don't have the advice of some of the people that understand this world and help them bring in themselves into a broadcast solution. But here at Corporate Events Online, we utilize a lot of the different types of tools and services, such as some of the video conferencing. We'll incorporate a Zoom, a Skype, and a Teams inside of a broadcast, utilizing technology such as NDI, bringing that in, to put it in a vMix computer setup, and produce a nice full-on production to get that engagement and interaction that they're looking for with the presenters, and also enjoy to watch as a viewer. So I would say those are the biggest things that we see that a lot of people are having a hard time to figure out. What is it that they actually should be doing? And what product should it be, and who should they be seeking out to help them?
Okay. Neil, what are your thoughts on the biggest challenges that live and remote workflows are facing these days?
Well, I mean, the migration towards these live and remote workflows in the cloud has been going on for a while, a number of years. I think obviously what's happened this year is accelerating that even further, but it still shows us that there's a way to go in certain areas, and we've touched on some of those. Frame accuracy in terms of whether it's live or on-demand workflows, that still poses some challenges. Also, color accuracy as well. So, for example, when you're working perhaps with remote workstations in the cloud and you're wanting to do color grading, that's still problematic. And obviously, traditionally, you would be linking up to SDI monitoring for color accuracy, or you're working with low latency hardware devices for problem playback. Some of those things still pose some challenges, and there's a lot of work that's been done around improving some of those areas. But we still have some limitations with the way web browsers interact. Things like HDR and Dolby Vision and some of the very high-end color reproduction systems still have issues with the browsers. And obviously, we're still reliant on domestic web broadband in most cases. So again, it's you get very variable quality, even though the expectation is for very high-end picture reproduction or sound latency and sound production. So that's at the very high end. But I think generally speaking, the ability to do a lot of this production in the cloud has been available for a couple of years, and certainly now a lot of it can be done remotely. So editing and graphics and a lot of these tools, you can work remotely. And obviously a lot of people have run home with laptops and hooking them up to screens and audio systems and things like that at home. But it then leaves a problem about getting the content. So needing to push and pull content, whether it's from a remote location or whether it's being pulled out of the cloud or pushed back to the cloud. So we've got some problems around that simply because of bandwidth limitations today.
All right, Jim, you started talking a little bit about the difference between the DIY approach and managed services. Could you dig into that a little deeper and talk about some of those differences and what a professionally deployed managed service can bring to the table that a DIY roll your own approach can't?
Reliability. People go through this process to be online to really get their message out and get somewhere with it. So bringing somebody in to help a viewer understand why maybe they aren't going to use a WebEx to go to everybody. Somebody that's going to say, okay, your meeting is taking you across the country and across the globe, and you're in the hundreds, or you're really getting into the thousands or tens of thousands. We need to really look at a one-to-many solution, but we can still incorporate some of these tools. I think we've got so much experience with all the different tools to fit the communication need that we're going to help them not only figure it out quick, but knock out some of the variables that are going to cause them to have failure.
Neil, would you like to chime in on some of those differences as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of companies will use some of the open source software that's out there, and there's a huge amount of it. There's a huge number of commercial technologies built on open source. But in order to leverage some of those yourself in a DIY approach, while it's perfectly possible, does have some challenges around who's going to support that technology, who's going to integrate it. If you have bugs, who do you go to? Often that open source technology may be driven by online communities. And you could argue you can get a good response from some of those, but ultimately you don't have much to fall back on if something does go wrong. You don't have support, which is often critical with some of these live workflows or anything that's mission critical. So what I've seen at least is use of open source technologies, but often rolled into commercial products to really give you the best of what the open source gives you, which is, it's widely adopted by a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses. It's pretty easy to implement, but it's ultimately supported and developed further under a commercial product. And I think that's where you can get the best of both worlds, benefiting from that open source nature, but where you have the backing of bug fixes, support, development, and things like that, and SLAs as well. Especially in a live workflow, things go wrong, and you've got business on the line relying on these types of technologies for live events or for where you've got large audience participations. And that's where sort of commercial solutions give you that backstop ultimately, I think.
Before we move on, Dan, do you have anything you'd like to add to the?
Well, particularly on the point of open source, we are fans of what the open source community can provide, but I wholeheartedly agree that it should be the backing of a commercial company that's going to give you the support necessary to make that open source implementation reliable. So I reiterate what Neil says, certainly, that doing it yourself is a question of how much risk are you willing to take on.
Yeah, right. That's it. A good balance between risk and reward. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Let's talk about the challenges in the specific live to VOD workflow for remote users. Neil, what are some key things that you can tell our viewers to be aware of in the live to VOD workflow?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've historically had lots of great examples where people were pushing the time from going from a live event, whether it's sports or a music event, to providing that full, finished, polished video on demand experience. So at the end of the match, you would expect to be able to grab or get access to the whole game immediately. So that technology has been developed for a couple of years, and we're now finding a lot of these streaming sports platforms were particularly good at handling live and then giving you recording and roll back to the beginning of a game. And then at the end of the live event, you've then got the match you can rewatch in full. But then the question was, well, how quickly can you give me the highlights? I want to have just the best bits, and I want this available as quickly as possible for distribution for VOD. And so some of those challenges have been met in the last couple of years, but obviously now, we've lost a lot of our sports events, a lot of our musical events, and a lot of our outdoor live activities. And still the challenges remain about how quickly can you reduce that time from live to VOD. So there's always been that time pressure. And often you find, still that we have some technical limitations in terms of being able to access live streams, being able to grab that material in a high quality, a broadcast quality, so that we can edit it down, remove any irrelevant content, or drop in any additional content like interviews, for example, or B-roll footage. So that time pressure still exists today. And again, maybe it goes a little bit back to some comments I made earlier around use of virtualized desktops and things like that, so that we can grab content that's in the cloud straight away. So rather than it traditionally being recorded on premise or recorded in an OB vehicle, we're actually now needing to do live remote work from the cloud. So the content has been sent straight to the cloud. It's being streamed from the cloud. And ultimately, we need people to be able to edit that content from the cloud as quickly as possible. So the technologies are there. How widely that's been adopted, I think is what we're seeing with the pandemic, and that, you know, this is just accelerating further what we've all been trying to do for the last couple of years, which is make this whole approach smoother, quicker, and less of a time pressure than it has been. So, you know, those are sort of some of the challenges that we've seen.
Jim, what are your thoughts and experiences, particularly in the last 6 months, 8 months, with how the live to VOD workflows have changed, and what roadblocks have you run into, and how have you overcome them?
I'd say the biggest thing is live to VOD fast is more important than ever.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of content is being produced, and they're trying to get as many people as they can to watch that. And the longer it doesn't get out on demand after being live, the harder it is. We focus pretty strong on the live industry, so that's our big focus on that, getting it from live and then getting it to on demand, and then maintaining that quality, and being able to make sure that you're serving, you know, the content to everybody at the best quality, also a lower quality if they're struggling with their internet.
Right, and I think that's something that that was touched on in the panel I moderated earlier, was that you really do need to take into account, even though most of our discussions in the industry tend to be about delivering the highest quality possible, right? That really means the highest quality for every user, which for someone on a mobile device on a bad cellular network is going to be quite different than someone who's hardwired on a smart TV.
Right. We've made it a practice to make sure that we're delivering, you know, enough a variable of different bit rates so that the users can have that good experience. But we also work on making sure that we understand that the environment that it's going in.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make a determination on how high of a bit rate or how low of a bit rate we may go?
Right. Dan, let's talk about the live to air workflow and how that has changed, and what are the biggest challenges and opportunities you've seen there, particularly when it comes to using cloud production tools, some of the things that Neil and Jim have already talked about, but going live to air.
Right. So ultimately the main difference is that you're taking that content, and sometimes, and particularly in the broadcast world, you want to, they expect an OTT delivery to be almost the very same, delivered in the same time frame as their over-the-air content. And on top of that, there's no chance for retakes if you're live. You make your decisions and you deliver the content. So the additional challenges, while all the ones of live to VOD are there, you could, and speed is of the essence, you could always take that extra second should there be problems with the initial edit. In live, you really don't have that option. So some of the biggest challenges of a cloud-based workflow versus kind of a point-to-point, bringing content back into the SDI world, into the regular production chain, it would be mostly revolving around latency. Should you have a production, is it production happening on site where the actual live action is happening, or is it happening, you know, somewhere remotely? So if it's remote, they're actually receiving the content and viewing it. Could be significantly after the actual, could be many seconds after, based on the web browser technology used and the path taken for the video. So you may be the director of the live production directors, maybe making choices for something that's already happened, you know, a number of seconds in the past. If you have to communicate back with camera operators live to ask them to take better shots, you have to be aware of the fact that you're watching something that may be significantly after. And you may have talent that's, if the talent's on site, they might be commenting in real time, but by the time it comes back, is it in sync with what the video production that's happening? So those are some of the challenges that you have to experiment with that you don't necessarily see. I mean, these are all do occur when you have point-to-point,
millisecond latencies. When we're talking about 100 milliseconds, you can usually mitigate some of those latency challenges of transferring the content back to studio. But when using the cloud, the latencies are in the seconds, and in that case, additional adjustments have to be made. And the final point is, in the cloud, the tools aren't always integratable necessarily with the encoders or the technology on site. Things like talkback channels and tally signals, which may be used to transfer information, production type information back to the site. If the cloud tool being used doesn't have the APIs to allow an operator to signal back down from their browser, back down to say an interface on site, there's some, again, more challenges that traditional live production or traditional remote production with gateways at both ends you would have to deal with.
Okay, Jim or Neil, any additional thoughts on the live to air challenges using cloud tools right now?
Some of the challenges are firewalls, right? So Neil or Daniel talked about that, but that's a big thing. You know, when we're dealing with SRT in some situations, and you know, that requires a port to the IP and making sure that you know how you're going to handle that situation. Are you going to use an external service to get out so you can, you know, both be callers, you know, to establish your connection without having any special port forwarding and requiring a IT group of a large organization to make firewall changes like that is pretty hard to do. So I'd say that's a big thing to watch out for.
Okay, Neil, let's return to you and talk a little bit about remote post-production. That's something that you're very focused on. What are the biggest issues in remote post-production today?
I think the single biggest issue we have today with post-production tools is that they're all desktop applications. You know, how can we cloudify our workflows when everything is stuck on a Mac or a PC? We're talking about everything from video editing, audio editing, color grading, motion graphics. You know, these are all applications developed by the A companies, the Apples, Adobes, Avids, and Autodesks of this world mostly. And until they cloudify their applications, or until they better integrate their applications into cloud-based workflows, we're still stuck pushing content back on-prem to the cloud all the time. In an ideal world, we would want to have everything going direct to cloud, and we'd be able to edit and access all of our content for post-production in the cloud. And today, that's just not viable. There are increasing numbers of tools and approaches that can allow some of this. We're talking about, you know, virtualizing Windows, running them in virtual machines, which we can run in AWS and use Teradici and all these great things. But ultimately, you know, that's just a Windows operating system. That doesn't support Mac users. So that's a limitation that some people in post-production have an issue with. You could argue that maybe they just need to move past the whole operating system argument, but that's still a limitation for those guys. And you also we still have latency issues and color issues in terms of being able to work with, you know, subframe latencies if we're doing audio work, or frame accuracy if we're making final editing decisions, and also color grading when we're making, we want to have, you know, HDR color grading, and we're trying to work with content that's stored in the cloud, and we're working on in a grading application. It's interesting to see some of the work that's being done around this. DaVinci of Resolve has been looking at trying to pioneer some of these sorts of workflows. But again, grading systems are reliant on hardware devices. And again, you know, you're expecting subframe latency when you input your color controls or your audio mixing desk. So again, these are all problems. I think, you know, generally though, you know, you can do offline editing, you can do a fair amount of audio work and graphics and grading work. But until we get that fully tied up integration between the desktop tools and, you know, virtualization of cloud storage and virtualization of all of the workflows around that, so that it all talks nicely together, we're still going to be stuck with this kind of pushing and pulling, or we're going to be hacking together integrations into our cloud workflows, because it's not standardized, to be honest with you. It's still very much different tools trying to plug the gaps which remain today in post-production. I think that's probably the single biggest challenge. And hopefully, what's happened this year will accelerate things further. We've all been trying to push to cloudifying our workflows for a good few years now. The need for teams to work globally and around the clock to access content shot in one location in another location straight away. I mean, these have been common things going on for a number of years, but this year it's just pushed it that much further. Nobody can continue to work with on-prem workflows where people are having to use virtual desktop to log into their machines in the office, having to VPN into their office, having to push archive content from an LTO tape into the cloud so they can then get access to it to do remote work on it. This is just not the way it can continue. So I think at least what I'm seeing is a lot of conversations with companies who are now talking about, well, forget keeping things on-prem. We've got to have it all in the cloud. Our archive, we can't keep it on tape. We've got to get it into the cloud. We've got to have all our content delivered straight into the cloud and try and work with it as much as possible in the cloud before we decide which bits we need to pull down on-prem and actually do work on. So it's become about being much more selective about what we pull down and also trying to get as much of it into the cloud from the get-go, rather than it being delivered on-prem on hard drives, then us having to sort of shift it around to actually make it useful.
But let's close then by talking specifically about COVID just for a couple minutes. Has COVID reinforced, refined, or redefined remote production, and in what ways that are likely to be permanent, not just temporary? I think, Neil, you mentioned that some of these things are never going back to normal, but I'd like each of your thoughts on that as we close up, starting with Dan.
Well, in fact, Jim mentioned it quickly, the ideas of teams and a variety of other it's called consumer tools are being quickly integrated. That might disappear slowly over time, some of those, but the convenience of not having to go, and have everybody in a central location and being able to do good productions using consumer tools will not go away for news. And then for higher end productions, look at just improve more professional tools, but basically without having to completely revisit how some of the great things that have happened over great productions that happened despite the lockdown that we've had. And I think, Jim pointed out exactly where I think the way is going, where we're all going.
Yeah, I go piggyback off that. It's in the live event business. We service large scale live event world, and it would be not in the idea of anybody's mind to say, let's just bring somebody in or a whole panel of people on a regular basis on a Zoom or a Skype call or a Teams right from their home. With the wanting the quality, the stability, the reliability of making sure that connection is right, or I want that picture perfect environment, right? It's accepted. It's just the acceptance of this production level has just changed enormously and permanently, really.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what Jim said. I think it's, we get in the broadcast industry, we get terribly bogged down in quality. We need 10-bit, we need uncompressed, it's got to be 4K. The reality is if it's good enough, people will consume it. And this, we've had video on the internet for 20 odd years now. It was amazing when it first was available 20 years ago over, dial-up modem, and you could get your first videos. And it continues to be, amaze me what technology can give us now. Here we are in a virtual trade show, a virtual convention. If you'd asked me this a year or two ago, I would have been like, hell no, I'll see you at NAB and I'll see you at IBC. And I look forward to those days coming again. But the reality is, this is the new normal. So we have to get used to the fact that these things are going to happen. If we get to go and be face-to-face again, it's going to be great. But we will still have these parallel live simultaneous events going on virtually, because there will always be people who can't make the event in person, who will want to see it live from their home, or they'll want to catch up with it on demand. And that's going to be the same. It's going to be true whether it's a studio, a Hollywood feature film, where, yeah, we'll go to the theater and we'll see it, and that'll be amazing again. But equally, I might be happy to stay at home. Maybe I'm a high-risk person, and I don't want to go to the cinema. I want to watch it at home, and I'll pay premium to see it, or I'll watch it as a catch-up service on my favorite on-demand platform. You know, that will be the new normal. Things will have changed forever, but it'll only be good ultimately for the whole industry. It's going to drive innovation like never before. And it's going to give consumers more choice, and it's going to give businesses more flexibility about how they can deliver this content. So I think it's the kick up the backside that the industry frankly needs, and it's only going to have a positive outcome for our industry overall.
Excellent. That's a great place to close. Thanks, Dan, Neil, and Jim. And we got to get off stage so that our next presenters can get on stage. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.